Look at these people. They're all very upset. They don't like each other very much. In fact, they hate each other. But why? Is it because they hold different political, philosophical, and religious views? Is it because they read different books, like different sorts of entertainment, and want different things? Value different goods? That's possible. But then one has to wonder why these folks aren't yelling at each other all the time. After all, they work together in the same world, shop at the same stores, often attend the same churches, watch many of the same movies, live in the same neighborhoods, eat at the same restaurants. They go through life day to day without violence for the most part, indeed without even openly disagreeing, since that would be impolite. It's hard to imagine how these people can get along reasonably well in ordinary affairs while apparently regarding each other as arch enemies. So what gives? Liberals and other collectivists often suggest that such mutual hatred results from a failure of communication, an inability to understand one's fellow man, and so to have peace and order, society needs a great man, or woman, to bring people together and help them communicate. Conservatives often suggest that these animosities are the result of a loss of a once universal set of common traditions, and so to have peace and order we need to restore, in places of power where they can be re-implemented, this once common tradition. These two explanations are very different, but oddly enough they are both wrong in more or less the same way. For both fail to notice that ideologically based animosity does not, as a general rule, lead to the kind of open hatred we see here on display. Walking down the streets, working in a store, going to church, an amusement park, a bookstore, etc., the people from Group A encounter the people from Group B every single day. Smiles, nods, how are you, and may I help you, fall easily from those same lips as might be screaming during this protest. So the question presses itself upon us. If all these very different people can get along from day to day without fanfare, why are they here lined up in a mock battle array, ready to tear each other's eyes out? Or put another way, if lack of a common worldview, failure to communicate, or the absence of common tradition are the reason why they hate each other, why don't these factors render all of life just as hostile and unlivable? And the answer is very simple. In all those areas in which very different people with diametrically opposed worldviews are able, nevertheless, to get along with each other, there is a relative absence of central control. Wherever people are free to do as they wish, associate with whom they wish, read what they wish, believe what they think is right, without interference from third parties, there is and will almost always be civil peace. That is because it is not in any individual's interest, no matter how obnoxious or contentious he may be, to initiate coercion against another where peaceful cooperation will do, and most people know this. Aggressive violence, in addition to being wrong, is costly and dangerous over the long term, and does not easily end itself, but rather tends to escalate. Except for the occasional criminal, people in general do not attempt to use force directly against those with whom they disagree. If a man is a Christian and desires to live in community with other Christians, he simply seeks out their company and avoids the atheists, and vice versa. On the other hand, if certain Christians and atheists want to engage in debate or discussion, they will find each other and make some arrangement which is suitable to them both. Like-minded or like-mission people can form any number of organizations to enshrine and promote their own worldviews or interests. And although many of these organizations are hierarchical and contain various levels and positions of authority, they are all voluntary in that those who join them do so freely and can leave freely. Their hierarchies are dictated by their function, and the function of the division of labor within those institutions. Authority within such hierarchies generally follows the lines of competency, and when it doesn't, as in the case of nepotism within some business, we cannot take said organization seriously, nor does any third party force us to, and yet there is no central hierarchical institution of which all clubs and organizations, all churches, all philosophy clubs, all families, all businesses, all sports teams, etc. belong. But perhaps I spoke too soon. What I ought to have said is, there obviously doesn't need to be some central hierarchical club for all clubs, central business for all businesses, etc. But there is an institution which claims to be the great hierarchy to which all little hierarchies belong, and to which they must pay a subscription fee. That institution is the state. The state is that institution which claims authority over all persons in a given territorial region and regards them from birth as members of its enterprise. Each individual is required to go to it for justice, pay to it various fees, and in numerous other ways live under its aegis. Should even one individual refuse to pay its fees, accept its services, or seek its blessing of legitimacy in any area of life that the state claims as its property, that individual is subjected to force or the threat of force. He can leave, of course, although he may have to pay a fee for leaving, and will be condemning himself to certain poverty and danger, as virtually every other area on earth where any significant number of people live, allowing for trade, the division of labor, and a decent life, is claimed by some state. Moreover, it is a curious quality of states that they tend to want to expand, and rather bizarrely, they do so even when their economic behavior is the direct opposite of what would be required to grow a business, a club, a family, or a church. They seem immune to the effects of their own self-destructive behavior, at least in the short term. But the state is parasitic, and every inch of its growth is ultimately a step towards its own destruction. For the state produces virtually nothing and extracts its income from the fruits of the labor of others. While it is true that some of the goods that the state provides would be necessary in any society, wherever they are provided by the state they are done so only at great cost and with a degree of inefficiency and clumsiness that would be incomprehensible in private society. Moreover, state goods are enforced by compulsion on everyone, whether or not he wishes to employ them or seek them through the state itself. It is a natural tendency of states to expand, because like parasites they are not self-sufficient entities. In order to acquire more goods, the state extends its tendrils deeper into the host, and in time the host, should he survive, begins to regard those goods provided by the state as uniquely state goods. The host begins to rely on the parasite as an indispensable provider of certain unique goods, whereas in reality the parasite relies on the host, not only for food, capital, but also for the general substance of the very goods, law, legal systems, charity, etc., of which the state itself is allegedly the unique provider. Should the parasite move too quickly, causing the host to question the desirability of this arrangement, a quick bite, violence on the margins, will set the host straight about what is really desirable, and indeed possible, in the real world. In order for the state to grow, it must necessarily increase its production of laws, licenses, regulation, and, of course, fees. There is nothing to check the state, since it has a monopoly over precisely those services, law, police, military, courts, that might realistically compete with the state. Even the most independent state court is funded by taxation, which renders rather humorous the idea that it is independent at all. Since government and state are now equivalent terms in the host's minds, they can't do much more than hem and haw at the worst actions of the state, because these actions have become legitimized. As the state becomes insinuated into every aspect of social life, life itself becomes politicized. It is no longer possible for us to all just get along. If the state is democratic, that simply means that each election, each governmental decision, each movement of the parasite is now a life or death struggle between its hosts. This is because politics, unlike production and trade, is a zero-sum game. Trade relies on mutual voluntary cooperation to increase the total goods available, making these goods more obtainable for everyone over time. But politics, like parasitism, always involves taking goods from one person by force and giving those goods to another. The state does not increase capital or anything else. It merely redirects it, reducing a producer's desire to produce, a trader's desire to trade, a responsible person's natural incentive to be responsible. In addition, social goods such as charity, voluntarism, the police responsibility of the ordinary citizen, and of course, the virtues necessary to maintain these, are atrophied as the state usurps these functions. The natural tendencies of people in community life towards avoiding costly conflict by being willing to compromise, by being polite and sociable, for the sake of getting along, are short-circuited by the monopolistic nature of the state, which, since it enforces rules in every aspect of social life for everyone in some territorial region, transforms life into a war of all against all. Again, this is even more true of a democracy in which everyone gets to vote on the handling of each other's person and property. Far from rescuing man from some Hobbesian murder melee into which he is supposedly on the verge of falling, the state creates this war by its very existence, for it forces man to employ the political means of legitimized coercion or else to be subject to it. Because it is totally beyond reason to ever expect all the people living in some geographical region to agree on one solution in all the areas in which the state presumes to make binding monolithic rulings, everyone must struggle to make sure his interests are represented and protected against everyone else by some part of the state. That is why an election is not that wonderful time when we all get together and decide for ourselves. No, we all do that every day in ordinary civil life. The election, or any action of the state, is an instance in which people, peaceful people, who disagree, are forced into conflict, since only one social direction is going to be imposed upon everybody within some arbitrary set of lines drawn on a map. Politics is nothing but a dressed-up game of who gets fed to the giant monster tick this week. For all the fanfare and chest-beating of democracy, there is no substantial difference between democracy and a nice Sunday game of human sacrifice. Politics, the actions of the state, facilitates and legitimizes theft, tyranny, and murder. So no wonder it pisses people off.